Let's stitch up the heather dress from Sew Over It. Hello makers, I'm Katherine from Minerva, and today I'm going to show you how to stitch up the Sew Over It heather dress, which just happens to be a kit that we have. I will link everything down below for you, so if you want to make your own heather dress in this exact fabric, you completely can. Plus, we have a lot of other fabrics to choose from. So to begin, gather up all of your materials. So to start, we have this lovely stretch knit fabric here. You want to make sure you select something that has a decent amount of stretch for this garment. And you get a printed pattern here, and you've got the two different views on the back. And then of course it's going to come with a jersey needle, matching thread, and some elastic to stabilize. And now that you have all of your materials all gathered, next you need to determine which size you are going to cut out. Now, if you grabbed the kit from Minerva, it comes with this beautiful printed pattern, and I always like to trace out my pattern ahead of time as opposed to cutting into that tissue, but the choice is up to you. Now, in terms of sizing, this pattern comes in a UK 6 through 20, which is a bust measurement of 31 inches up to 45 inches, a waist measurement of 24 inches up to 38 inches, and a hip measurement of 34 inches up to 48 inches. Now, do be sure to check the finished garment size chart on the measurements here, just because I found that I ended up having to grade between two sizes. For the bust and the hip, I was on the larger size, and then I actually went down in the waist, and after doing up my muslin, I did have to make a little bit of an adjustment to the curve within that waist to hip as I was grading out. So just be sure to do up a muslin and tailor it to your specific body type. And now for the fun part, let's get stitching. So we're going to start by attaching the back to the center back and side back here. So we are just going to grab those pieces, and I am just laying them flat. So this is the center back, and these are our two side back pieces. And I am just going to place them right sides together, and because this is cut on a curve, you will have to match up these notches, but it makes it nice and easy. And you should be able to walk that fabric right along this curve, and it will fit perfectly. You don't need to do any stretching at all to that fabric. So go ahead and put a decent amount of pins in there. I like to start at the notch and then pin each of the top and bottom, and then just distribute my pins in between. I find that that helps with the fullness and making sure that everything is lined up as it should be. So after you've got that side pinned in, then you're going to go ahead and stitch it, and I went ahead and serged it. So we're going to do the second side here as well, and we are just going to get that pinned in place. There we go, and then stitch and serge that in place. Now do be sure to switch over to a jersey needle. You don't want to be using your universal needle on knit fabric. So I'm just going to quickly switch this over, and while you're at it, be sure to thread up with matching thread and fill up a fresh bobbin. So I am just going in here, and I am going to stitch this in place, and just following along the seam allowance indicated in the pattern here. And just go slow, make sure that nothing is rippling or puckering as you go along and stitch this. And once you get to the end, don't forget to backstitch. Now I always like to stitch it even if I am going to be serging it. I find it makes my clothes last a little bit longer and is a bit more durable. So I'm just going in here with my serger, and I'm just trimming off the excess. So the edge of the line of my stitching is going to come right up along the edge of where I had originally stitched here. So next we are going to press these seams towards the sides of the dress here. So you can see that it is just like so, and then just go ahead and press it along the top. Now here, there is an optional step where you can actually go ahead and top stitch. So you can go in and top stitch using your regular needle on your sewing machine. Right here, I'm going to be doing my cover stitch. So I just put a piece of scrap fabric in here so that I can have it go nice and seamlessly onto my piece. And I like to have that twin needle look that the cover stitch gives. It also provides a decent amount of stretching ability when you're using a cover stitch. Or if you have a domestic machine, you can use a twin needle. It will do the same thing as well. So I've just gone ahead and top stitched that in place so it lies nice and flat and it's nice and clean on the back. And do forgive me for some of the pet hair being on here. Now we're going to attach the side front to the center front. So we're going to grab those pieces here. So this is our center front piece. And then we're going to grab the side front piece. So you'll notice that this piece kind of has two sides. One that dips in, that has these two notches right here, and one that has a slightly more gentle curve. And so you want to line it up to where that main dip is. That is going to go right along this piece along our center front. Okay, so that beautiful curved piece on the center front is going to go into that nice dip. Now, the reason that the bottom of this has this sort of bulge on the bottom, that is going to form our pockets. So we are just going to go in here and you'll notice that there is a circle notch on that pattern piece on the center front. So do be sure to mark that on your piece. I have already marked it, but I want to show you right here this little circle here, and just so that you can see it just a little bit better, I think I'm going to grab my chalk here. I'm just going to use a yellow chalk for you, and I am going to make it so you can see it just a little bit better on camera. But basically, we are going to stop our stitching at that point. I'm just putting on a pin so that I know where I need to stop here. And so then starting at the top, go ahead and pin the top of that side front. And then I like to go in and actually pin that bottom piece just so that I know where to stop. I'm just popping in that dot along here. But you could also stitch from the opposite side where you've actually transferred those pattern markings onto the pattern piece. So we are just going to stitch along that dot, and we're going to do the same thing on the other side here. So just as I'm going, I will just do this one a little bit quicker than we did the other one because you've already seen it. So we're just going to pin going from the top to that large circle on the pattern piece. So do be sure that you mark this clearly so that you don't go past that mark. It's very important that you stop at that large circle. So you can see that I have stopped at that large circle here, and it looks just like so. Now we've got to pull that pocket piece away. Now this is actually that pocket facing piece. So we are going to place the pocket facing right sides together, and you're going to line up along the edge of that pocket here. And so this pocket lines up with where that small dot is on your pattern piece. So you're just going to pin that in place, and you are going to stitch along this hemline right up to that small dot. And we're going to do the same thing along the other side here. And just get that nicely stitched in place and pinned. And you shouldn't have to stretch any of this fabric. It should fit just perfectly along here. So as we do this, be sure to follow the same seam allowance, and I am slowly putting my needle in because I want to get as close as I can to that large dot that we had before, just so it's a nice seamless seam along here. And don't forget to backstitch at the start and the end of those seams. So I went ahead and I serged this piece after I stitched that. That's completely optional. You don't have to do it. It is not in the instructions, but it does help to finish the garment quite nicely. Now in this instance, I'm folding my pocket up so that it goes along the side seam, and then we're just going to baste it in place. And because we are basting it, we want to make sure that that is within the seam allowance. So we want to make it a little bit smaller. than you would using your regular seam allowance. So just go ahead and baste that in place to hold the pocket in there. As you can see, our pocket has formed along the front. Now for the shoulder seams. So for the shoulder seams, we are going to place our front and our back of our dress right sides together at those shoulder seams, and we're going to pin them in place. And then it is quite simply as easy as just stitching those shoulder seams along the top right here. So we're going to stitch that in place, and you will see we have some clear elastic that came in the kit. Now this is used to stabilize the shoulder seams, and you could use twill tape, but clear elastic works so wonderfully with knits, and it helps to prevent any drooping that you might find in your shoulders. With clear elastic, be sure to pre-stretch it before you actually stitch it on, and we want to attach it only to the back side within the seam allowance, so you don't want it to go over that seam allowance. So right here, we're just going to stitch it on with a straight stitch. Nice and simple, and then trim those edges because I cut my elastic a little bit longer. So once that is attached, I went ahead and actually serged my shoulder seams so that I had a nice finish. The next thing we're going to do is press those shoulder seams towards the back of the garment. And I like to use a decent amount of steam when I'm working with a stable knit like this. Now we're going to attach the sleeves. Now in this section, I decided to do the order of the steps slightly differently than the pattern instructions. I find this way to put in sleeves a heck of a lot easier than the way the instructions dictated, because you don't actually have to set in that sleeve. By attaching the sleeve prior to doing the side seam, you don't have to stitch anything in the round. It's a heck of a lot easier if you're using a serger because you don't have to hide and tie off any of those tails. And I find it comes together a lot easier. So let's get into it. Okay, so we're going to grab our sleeve pattern piece right here. And so this sleeve has a front and a back. And how we're going to denote what is the front and the back is based on the notches. So you'll notice there are two notches right here and a single notch along here and one in the center. The two notches is the back, and it corresponds to these two notches on the back of the dress, and the single notch denotes the front. It is always the same in every sewing pattern. Two notches for the back and one for the front. Match up that notch along the center shoulder seam here, then match up the double notches in the back and then the very end of that sleeve. And then go ahead and distribute the rest of the pins in between those notches and that shoulder seam. Then we're just going to repeat that process along the other side, matching up that single notch on the front and the end of the sleeve, and then just distributing those pins in between those notches. That way everything is lying nicely and you don't have to set that sleeve in. Then go ahead and pop on over to your machine, stitch it, and then serge it. So it should look just like so. So I want to pull this out so you can see it. So I've stitched and serged it. And then the fun part is stitching up these side seams. And we actually stitch the side seam of the sleeve at the same time as we stitch the side seam of the dress. So I like to match up the underarm seam first, and then I just go up the arm and then match up the rest, and you will notice how the pocket pieces line up with some of those style lines that you have on the back, and then just matching up the bottom of the dress. Add in as many pins or clips as you need, and then head on over and stitch it and then serge the edges to clean it up. And it'll look a little something like this. Now we can turn it right side out and it is really starting to look like a dress. Now if you want, at this point, you can try your dress on, but we only have a few steps left in this. So let's get on to actually going in and doing the neckband. So with this neckband, in the instructions, it does say that you need to measure around your neck hole and trim it as necessary. I trimmed off about 1 to 2 inches off of mine. Then you're going to place it right sides together and stitch it into a loop. And then we're going to take that loop and we're going to fold it wrong sides together in half, just like so. And then we are going to press it I find working with a pressing hem really helps in this process. That way you're not going to get any weird folds in it because you're working in the round with this neckband. And once that is done, we are going to attach our neckband. So we need to quarter our dress. So I place the shoulders together, and then I grab the center back and the center front, and I'm going to mark that with a pin, or you could use chalk to mark that as well. Then I put those two together and mark the centers from either side, because we have a longer seam line going in the front because it dips down lower than the back. Our shoulder seams are not going to be those quarter points. And then we are going to quarter the neckband. So you're going to do the exact same thing where you divide it in half to get the front and the back, and then divide it in half again to get those quarter points. Then we are going to match up those quarter points. Now I placed the seam on my neckband at the very back of my dress. Now if you had an instance where the neckline was a little bit higher and the center actually came at that shoulder seam, a lot of the times in ready-to-wear garments, you'll notice that that seam of the neckband actually lies along the shoulder seam there. So you could place it right on that shoulder seam, but you're going to have to quarter it up just slightly differently if you're going to use that seam as that quarter point. So I am matching up all of those quarter points, and then from there, all I am doing is just pinning my neckband with right sides together, matching up those salve edges along the top, and just pinning it in place so that I can stitch this neckband onto my dress. And just going around. And with knits, I tend to prefer using clips, but in this instance, I found that the pins worked quite well. If you're finding your fabric is a little bit thicker, you might want to use clips instead of pins because it will more securely hold that fabric in place. I actually end up using clips later. So stitch it and serge it, and you will see your neckband just like so. And one of the things that I like to do at this point is to press it, and then I like to top stitch it. You can use a twin needle to top stitch, or just a regular stretch stitch along there, whether that's a lightning stitch or a zigzag. I decided to use my cover stitch, so I'm going to have to bury those thread tails. And because I did it in a round, unlike how I had done the top stitching before, we are going to have to tie these off. So you will have 2 thread tails on the front of your garment. Just thread them through your needle and then poke them to the back. You should have 6 threads on the back, and then you are just going to tie them in place. And if you don't have a cover stitch machine and you're using a twin needle or a zigzag stitch, you don't even have to worry about this step. But if you want to get a little bit fancy and use that cover stitch, this is how you would tie off those thread tails to make sure that nothing unravels on you. And then don't forget to clip that. And you can see that this creates a nice stretchy neckband with some really beautiful top stitching along here. And it lies nice and flat when you do that top stitching. Now for hemming and finishing touches. So with this, I decided to hem it up 1 inch. In the pattern, I do believe it says 2 centimeters, and I found 1 inch to be the perfect amount to hem my dress at. So I originally started out with the pins, but I decided to use clips. I always find clips on a knit work very nicely holding in this hemline. So you'll notice that I am placing my clips upside down, and that is because I'm using my cover stitch to hem this, because I'm going to be working from the top of the garment. Now, if you're using a twin needle on your domestic sewing machine, you will also want to place them upside down as well, because you will be working from the top and front of your garment. But if you're just going to do a simple straight stitch or a zigzag along the edge, you can work from the inside. So you can see this has been hemmed, and then we just need to hem those sleeves. So I went in here and I decided to do 5/8 of an inch folded over for my cuffs on my sleeves, and I just top stitched that just like so using my cover stitch machine. And the dress is completely done. We've got these gorgeous pockets, and now for the reveal.
Let it go. spend some time alone, you know where to find me, you know which way to go. As long as you love me, we'll be singing all night long. So take a minute to hold me. I want nothing more than your arms and to be your baby tonight.
And there you have it. Your heather dress is all complete. Now, if you have any questions at all, do leave them in the comments down below and we'll be sure to get back to you as soon as we can. Now, if you are not already a member on the Minerva site here, head on over and create a free profile. You can share all of your wonderful sewing makes, photos, and videos with the community and connect with other fellow makers and see what projects they're up to. And if you want to know a little bit more about me, you can check out my profile here on Minerva at Sheer Stitchery. And if you do decide to make this up, do be sure to use the hashtag SOI Heather Dress as well as hashtag Minerva Kits. Until next time, makers, let's get our sewspiration on.